She sat quietly, smiling at her son, until someone recognized her face. A file was pulled, a name confirmed, and the room froze, because the woman clapping in the back row once crawled through enemy lines and became the first of her kind to lead men into battle. The military recruiting station in downtown Phoenix operated with the efficient professionalism that marked all such facilities, where young Americans came to begin the process of transforming from civilians into soldiers. The office buzzed with quiet activity as recruiters processed paperwork, conducted interviews, and guided potential enlistees through the complex procedures that would determine their military futures. Among the family members and friends who had gathered to support their loved ones through this significant life decision sat a woman in her late 40s whose presence drew no particular attention from the busy recruiting staff. She was dressed simply in casual civilian clothes, her graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her attention focused entirely on her 18-year-old son, who was completing the final stages of his enlistment process. To the casual observer, Maria Santos appeared to be exactly what she seemed, a proud mother supporting her son's decision to serve his country, perhaps slightly nervous about the challenges he would face in basic training and beyond, but clearly committed to being present for this important milestone in his young life. Her demeanor was calm and supportive, her questions to the recruiters thoughtful but routine, her overall presence unremarkable among the dozens of family members who passed through the facility each week. But appearances, as the recruiting station was about to discover, could conceal histories that challenged every assumption about who had served where and how the military had evolved to include capabilities that most people never knew existed. The quiet woman watching her son take his oath of enlistment carried credentials that would transform everyone's understanding of what had been accomplished by previous generations of military personnel. Welcome to Silent Salute. Before we continue this remarkable story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being a part of it. Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez had been working as a recruiter for 3 years, long enough to develop efficient routines for processing new enlistees, while providing appropriate support for their families during what was often an emotional and stressful experience. His approach was professional but personal, understanding that successful recruiting required attention to both administrative details and human dynamics that could affect a family's confidence in their loved one's military career decision. Rodriguez had noticed Maria Santos primarily because of her son's exceptional qualifications. High test scores, strong physical fitness, clear motivation for military service that went beyond simple economic necessity or lack of civilian alternatives. David Santos represented the kind of recruit that military services competed to attract, someone whose capabilities suggested potential for advanced training and leadership development. During the interview process, Rodriguez had been impressed by the family's knowledge of military culture and their realistic understanding of what military service would require from David. Unlike many families whose understanding of military life was based on movies or media coverage, the Santos family demonstrated familiarity with military values, traditions, and expectations that suggested direct experience with military service. When Rodriguez asked about family military history, David had mentioned that his mother was a veteran but had been vague about the specifics of her service. Such reticence was common among military families, where modesty about service records was often preferred to detailed discussion of military achievements or experiences that might be difficult for civilians to understand. The enlistment ceremony proceeded smoothly, with David taking his oath while family members observed from the designated seating area. Rodriguez had conducted hundreds of such ceremonies, but he always found them meaningful as moments when young Americans committed themselves to service that would define their adult lives and contribute to national defense in ways that extended far beyond individual achievement. As the ceremony concluded and families began gathering with their newly enlisted soldiers for photographs and congratulations, Rodriguez approached the Santos family to offer his business card and contact information for questions that might arise during David's transition to military service. His interaction with Maria Santos was initially routine, professional courtesy extended to all military families. But something about Maria's bearing had caught Rodriguez's attention during the ceremony. Her posture during the oath, her familiarity with military protocol, her emotional response to the proceedings all suggested military experience that went beyond typical veteran family support. When she mentioned her own Army service, Rodriguez found himself curious about details that hadn't emerged during the family interview. The conversation that followed began routinely, with Rodriguez expressing appreciation for the family's military tradition and asking general questions about Maria's service background. Her responses were modest, but revealed information that began to challenge Rodriguez's assumptions about her military experience and the significance of what she had accomplished during her time in uniform. Maria had served in the Army for 12 years, from 1995 to 2007, during a period when women's roles in military service were expanding but still significantly limited compared to contemporary policies. Her service had included multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, assignments that had tested her capabilities under demanding circumstances while contributing to missions that were classified at levels that prevented detailed public discussion. As Rodriguez asked follow-up questions about Maria's military specialty and assignments, the details that emerged painted a picture of service that exceeded routine deployment experiences. She had been assigned to special operations units during periods when such assignments for women were virtually unprecedented, had completed training programs that were among the most demanding in military service, had earned qualifications that placed her among the most elite military personnel of her generation. The moment of recognition came when Rodriguez asked about Maria's military occupational specialty, and she mentioned that she had been a ranger. Not a supporter of ranger operations, not someone who had worked alongside rangers, but an actual graduate of ranger school who had earned the tab and served in ranger units during combat operations in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Rodriguez's professional composure wavered as the implications of what he was hearing became clear. Maria Santos wasn't just a veteran. She was potentially the first woman to complete ranger training and serve in ranger units, an achievement that had occurred years before such accomplishments became public knowledge and decades before women were officially allowed to attempt ranger school. The silence that followed Rodriguez's realization was profound and transformative. Other recruiting staff members, overhearing fragments of the conversation, began to gather around as word spread that they were in the presence of someone whose military achievements had been groundbreaking in ways that challenged every assumption about women's roles in combat operations. Maria's discomfort with the sudden attention was evident, but she acknowledged the accuracy of Rodriguez's assessment while emphasizing that her service had been part of classified programs that weren't widely known even within military circles. Her ranger qualification had been earned through experimental programs designed to test women's capabilities in special operations roles during a period when such opportunities were limited and controversial. The details that emerged painted a picture of military service that exceeded anything the recruiting staff had encountered in their combined careers. Maria had not only completed ranger school, but had served multiple combat deployments in ranger units, leading missions that remained classified years after their completion, earning commendations that recognized exceptional performance under the most demanding circumstances. Her training had been conducted separately from male candidates due to policy restrictions that existed at the time, but the standards had been identical to those required of male rangers. Her performance had exceeded the minimum requirements in every category, earning her place among the elite special operations personnel who formed the backbone of American military capability in asymmetric warfare environments. The missions that Maria had conducted during her deployments included direct action raids, reconnaissance operations, and leadership of joint task forces that combined American special operations personnel with allied forces and local military units. Her effectiveness in these roles had contributed to mission success rates that exceeded statistical norms for similar operations. Her leadership of male soldiers in combat situations had been particularly noteworthy, demonstrating that effective military leadership transcended gender boundaries when it was based on competence, courage, and commitment to mission accomplishment. The soldiers she had commanded had expressed consistent confidence in her tactical judgment and personal courage under fire. The cultural intelligence that Maria had brought to special operations in Iraq and Afghanistan had been invaluable in environments where understanding local customs and building relationships with civilian populations were crucial to mission success. Her ability to navigate complex cultural situations had provided operational advantages that couldn't be replicated by male-only teams. Her transition out of military service had been motivated by family considerations rather than professional limitations, understanding that the demands of special operations were incompatible with her desire to provide stable home environment for her son during his formative years. The choice had been difficult, but reflected her priorities regarding family responsibilities. The security clearances that Maria had maintained during her military service prevented detailed discussion of many of her operational experiences, but the general outline of her service painted a picture of contributions that had been significant but largely unrecognized due to classification requirements and policies that restricted public acknowledgement of women's roles in combat operations. Rodriguez realized that he was conducting David Santos's enlistment ceremony in the presence of someone whose military achievements far exceeded those of most personnel he had encountered during his recruiting career. The irony that such an accomplished veteran was watching her son begin military service provided perspective on military tradition and family legacy that extended across generations. The other recruiting staff members began sharing their own knowledge of Ranger operations and Special Forces capabilities, understanding that Maria's experience provided insights into military capabilities that most people never encountered. The conversation became an impromptu education session about special operations and women's evolving roles in military service. David Santos found himself learning details about his mother's military service that she had never shared with him, understanding for the first time the magnitude of what she had accomplished and the significance of the path she had chosen to leave in order to focus on raising him. The revelation provided new context for understanding her values and expectations. The recruiting station's atmosphere had been completely transformed by the discovery of Maria's background. What had begun as routine enlistment processing had become an encounter with military history, an opportunity to learn from someone whose service had broken barriers while establishing new standards for what women could accomplish in military service. Military personnel from other offices in the building began arriving as word spread about Maria's presence, understanding that opportunities to meet genuine pioneers in military service were rare and valuable. The gathering that formed around her was respectful but intense, reflecting genuine appreciation for what her service had represented. The questions that followed focused on training experiences, operational challenges, and leadership development rather than personal details or political aspects of gender integration. Maria's responses emphasized professional competence and mission accomplishment rather than breaking barriers or advancing causes, understanding that her effectiveness had been measured by results rather than symbolic value. Her advice to David about military service drew on experiences that few parents could provide, offering insights into special operations culture, leadership under pressure, and maintaining personal values while adapting to military requirements. The guidance was both practical and philosophical, reflecting deep understanding of what military service could demand and provide. The recruiting staff began documenting Maria's visit in their records, understanding that her presence represented a historic moment for their facility. The first female ranger had watched her son enlist at their station, creating a story that would be remembered and shared throughout the recruiting community. Maria's influence on the other military families present was immediate and profound. Parents who had been anxious about their children's military service found reassurance in meeting someone who had not only succeeded in the most demanding military roles, but had successfully transitioned to civilian life while maintaining military values. The young recruits who witnessed Maria's recognition gained understanding that military service could provide opportunities for achievement that transcended traditional boundaries, that excellence was recognized regardless of demographic categories, that their own potential was limited only by their willingness to meet military standards and embrace military values. As the gathering began to disperse, recruiting personnel approached Maria individually to express appreciation for her service and request permission to share her story with future recruits and their families. Her response emphasized the importance of focusing on current opportunities rather than historical achievements, understanding that her legacy was best honored through continued excellence by future generations. The documentation process for David's enlistment was enhanced by the recognition of his family's military tradition, ensuring that his service would begin with appropriate understanding of the legacy he was continuing. The recruiting staff committed to monitoring his progress and providing support that reflected appreciation for his family's contributions to military service. Maria's contact information was requested by military historians and women's advocacy organizations who understood that her story provided important documentation of women's roles in military service during a period when such contributions were largely classified or unrecognized. Her willingness to share information was balanced by respect for security requirements and personal privacy. The local media coverage of Maria's recognition focused on themes of family military tradition and evolving opportunities for women in military service. Understanding that her story provided positive examples of how military families could contribute across generations while adapting to changing policies and requirements. Military training institutions began reaching out to Maria for potential involvement in leadership development programs. Understanding that her experience provided unique perspectives on special operations, gender integration, and family considerations that could benefit current and future military personnel. The recruiting station incorporated Maria's story into their presentation materials for potential recruits and their families, understanding that her example provided powerful demonstration of what military service could accomplish when individual excellence met institutional opportunity. Her achievements challenged assumptions while inspiring future service. David's military career began with understanding that he was continuing a family tradition of excellence that included achievements most people never knew existed. The pressure and pride associated with that legacy provided motivation while demonstrating the importance of maintaining high standards regardless of family background. The special operations community gained renewed appreciation for the contributions that women had made during periods when their service was restricted, but their capabilities were quietly recognized and utilized by commanders who valued results over politics. Maria's story became part of institutional memory about effective leadership and mission accomplishment. Years later, when women's participation in combat roles became official policy, Maria's pioneering service was recognized as having provided proof of concept for capabilities that policy changes finally acknowledged. Her experience had demonstrated that women could excel in the most demanding military roles when given appropriate opportunities and support. The recruiting station where Maria's background had been revealed became something of a pilgrimage site for military families who wanted to visit the place where the first female ranger had watched her son continue the family tradition of military service. The location carried symbolic significance that enhanced its role in military recruiting. Maria's mentorship of younger female military personnel became a formal program that provided guidance and support for women seeking to excel in military careers while balancing family responsibilities and personal goals. Her experience provided practical advice based on real-world success in overcoming barriers and achieving excellence. The classified nature of many of Maria's operational experiences meant that full recognition of her contributions would remain limited, but the acknowledgement she received from military communities provided validation that her service had been significant and appreciated by those who understood its importance. Military families gained new understanding of how service traditions could evolve across generations, with children building on parental achievements while adapting to changing opportunities and requirements. Maria's story demonstrated how family military legacy could provide foundation for continued excellence rather than limitation of individual potential. The security protocols that had protected Maria's service during her active duty years were gradually relaxed as operational details became historical rather than current intelligence, allowing more complete documentation of her contributions to special operations and women's military service. Sometimes the most groundbreaking achievements happen in classified silence, recognized only by those who needed to know and appreciated fully only years later when policies catch up to proven capabilities. Sometimes the first to break barriers do so without fanfare, focusing on mission accomplishment rather than symbolic significance. Sometimes the parents watching their children enlist carry credentials that exceed those of everyone else in the room. Maria Santos had never sought recognition for being the first woman to earn Ranger qualification and serve in Ranger units. She had focused on mission accomplishment and professional excellence, understanding that her effectiveness would be measured by results rather than historical significance. When her achievements finally received appropriate acknowledgement, They provided inspiration and education that honored both her individual service and the broader evolution of opportunities for women in military service. This story was brought to you by Silent Salute. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever discovered that someone you thought you knew carried achievements that completely changed your understanding of what was possible? Have you met pioneers whose groundbreaking accomplishments were hidden behind modest circumstances and quiet dignity? Tell us in the comments about the trailblazers you've encountered and the lessons they taught you about excellence and perseverance. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.